Today on In Good Faith, we get to talk interfaith with some people who have been very busily occupied, not just studying about interfaith work, but actually getting involved and rolling up their sleeves and doing the actual work, which I'm really impressed by. So here around our table, we have two professors here at Brigham Young University. Dr. Andy Reid studied Russian, Ukrainian, and European history at Arizona State with a master's from the University of Oxford and from the University of Cambridge. And I'll get to this in just a moment about his founding of the BYU Interfaith Student Association in 2018. Dr. Mike McKay is an associate professor of religion in the Department of Church History and Doctrine and former historian writer for the Joseph Smith Papers Project, teaches world religions, among other subjects. And both of you, professors, thank you for being here today.
Thanks. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure.
And of course, we wouldn't be a good university without some incredible students. Grace Chipman is from Canada. She's studying global women's studies as a minor and is a history major. She's a senior. Grace, thank you.
Thank you.
Janai Wright is from Austin, Texas, a philosophy major and a student fellow on the Council for Interfaith Engagement. And she participated in the Wolf Institute Summer School 2022 and was a BYU intern at that institute 2023. We'll tell you about what the Wolf Institute does. And also Katelyn Boyer from Boston in international relations, co-president of the IFSA and participant in the Boise Interfaith Seminar of 2023, which was alleviating poverty through service and scholarship on the trip. She's a sophomore.
Happy to be here.
Dr. Andy Reid, what about founding this in 2018? What was the need that you saw?
Well, it's a great opportunity to kind of talk about this history a little bit because the students that we have here today are part of that. In 2017, there was the predecessor to the Council for Interfaith Engagement was known as the Religious Outreach Council, and we had a discussion on that council with a number of professors thinking about, as a council at a university, we ought to be working with students, and we didn't have an arm for doing that at that time. And so we put out a call to students just across the university and said, we're going to get together, we're going to have a conversation, see if there's interest in creating some kind of club or a student association. The first meeting we had in February of that year, we opened it up to students. We had about 45 students show up off the bat, and there was some kind of immediate interest among the students thinking about, at BYU we have a lot of Latter-day Saints. We don't have as many non-Latter-day Saints. Very, very small percentage of our students are from that are from other, from our tradition or from our other traditions. And so we wanted to kind of think about how do we reach them, those students specifically, but also how do we help students who come from the religious majority at this university learn how to engage, talk with, think about the needs of those students and better understand the traditions they come from. And so the Student Interfaith Club started and eventually became a student association.
Grace, I wonder, because you're a senior, so
Yes.
You've had some years here, what drew you?
So I originally took Dr. Reid's interfaith class, and it was just really inspiring to learn about a lot of different faiths. But I also, growing up in Canada, knew a lot of kids at my school and just in my community, people of different faiths. And I often had violin recitals at the Catholic Church or at our church building in Canada. We would have the Islamic mosque close. They would have people come pray at our chapel for Ramadan because they didn't have enough room in their mosque. So I was able to interact with people of many different faiths, and I found that I could be inspired by other people's faiths. And when I took the class and learned more about it, I saw that I could see truth in so many different things and that my own faith could be bolstered through that of others.
Thank you. And Mike McKay, teaching world religions. I mean, if you're going to be involved in interfaith activities, this is not a bad place to start. Why in a religiously sponsored university like Brigham Young University is that concept of studying world religion so important?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. And I think so world religions in the religious education department or college it's one of the most sought after classes that isn't required. So it's an elective. And so we get a lot of students who are really interested. And part of the reason they're interested is in a globalized world, individuals are realizing how far reach, their consciousness is being expressed far further than just the people that they're speaking with across the internet. And so this world that they live in, it's demanding a kind of response from them, one that maybe when this world was smaller, when you could exist in a much smaller space, maybe there wasn't as much pressure there. But I think right now, they, like Latter-day Saints at BYU, are sincerely asking the question is, how do I be a good person in the world? And to be a good person in the world, can I be the best kind of person through some religious literacy? And I think the outcome of those classes are students are becoming better Latter-day Saints by becoming connected. Instead of rejecting those who are not part of the religion, embracing them as partners has created a space for them to be as the best person they can be.
So in taking a world religions class, you must have had some expectation. But was it what you expected, and what was your takeaway from that? Was there anything that you learned that you were surprised by?
Well, I went to a Catholic high school, and that's what drew me to this Interfaith Student Association. It's what drew me into the class. I was surprised, I suppose, by how much richness there is existing in other faith traditions. My exposure to other faith traditions was limited pretty much to Catholicism at the time, and that's what drew me to the class and drew me to that kind of work, because I knew that there was more out there. There were more people that I could make connections with, and to move beyond my own faith tradition in order to create friendships. But I suppose that the thing that was most surprising was how much richness there is, how many similarities, but how many differences. But not only are there so many differences that exist, but I can value those differences as well.
Did that affect your own faith in any way?
Yes. It required that I develop faith in the more true sense, which is that, I have all of these beliefs, and I've chosen my own religious tradition because I have these beliefs. But I have some serious limitations into my own worldview. And so learning about other people's perspectives, learning about their worldviews, helped me to become a more cooperative person. And as a result, my own faith became more rich as well.
Well, I would love to jump right into this practical application, because you seem determined to take this out of the classroom, Dr. Reed.
I think that this, the students that are taking these world religions classes, that are in our interfaith leadership class, they're looking for application. It's something that we at BYU as professors are trying to figure out, how do we help our students apply the things we're teaching them in class. And so, Mike and I have spent too much time probably thinking about how do you do this, and what does it look like when how do we make that happen? And we were teaching this interfaith leadership class just for the first time this last winter, and we sort of turned it over to the students and said, we have this idea. We want to find a project that we can directly apply what we're talking about in class. And then we sort of turned it to them and said, where are we going to go? What are we going to think about? What are we going to work on? How are we going to pay for it? Right? And our students...
This is a lot to throw on the students.
It was.
It was
great.
a lot.
Talk about faith, right? We have pretty amazing students, but we sort of just turned it to them and said, you've developed a set of skills as leaders. You've learned to think about these things. You have the right questions. Now can you do something with it? I think for a religious community like we have, a church-sponsored institution like Brigham Young University, we're trying to figure out how can we have an impact on the world. And this project where we took students to Boise, but also having students in England through the Wolf Institute, those have been ways in which students have applied what they're learning and had a kind of hands-on experience.
Katelyn, tell me about the planning then.
Well, it was kind of daunting at the beginning, because Mike and Andy walked in and were like, hey, we have this idea to go to Boise, figure it out. And it's me and 25 other students. But it was a really cool process to kind of sit down and think about, okay, if we want to go to Boise, who do we want to work with? And looking at Native American populations and other Christian faiths and Muslim like organizations and Hindu organizations, and starting to sort of group it off and be like, okay, you three over here, you're going to take the mosque, try and reach out to them and see what we can do with them. You three over here, you're going to talk to the Native American population, see how we can work with them. And, you know, some of those things that we planned at the beginning didn't pan out, but we were able to go and serve with a lot of people that I'd written little, you know, papers about to send in on Canvas, right? Like it was really cool to help plan it and then see it come together in real life and participate in those things that I'd helped plan and I'd, you know, known as they were planning.
So it was a big offer of service or working together with them on a project they perceived as a community need.
Yeah, so we decided that we wanted to work with other faiths on homelessness because Boise is one of the largest populations of people without homes. And so we reached out to faith groups that were working in the area in that sort of sphere and said, hey, we've got, you know, 10 BYU students and some professors. We want to be hands to do your work. And we want to learn how you do your work and why you do your work. So
you get there. You show up. What do we do now?
It was a lot of different things. We worked in homeless shelters. We sorted clothes. We just talked with people that were homeless and sort of learned their stories. We went to I think I went to 8 different church services on a Sunday. I felt like I was done with church for a year. But we learned a lot of different things and we saw a lot of different things. And we essentially just showed up and were like, hey, okay, you have a plan. How are you going to use us?
So it's really busy. You're trying to fit a lot in. Mm-hmm. Are there one or two things that really made the biggest impact on you or really touched you?
Oh, gosh, there were so many. One of the things that I really loved was experiencing genuine sort of faith from others. Like the first day we got there, we went to a Shabbat service with the local Reformed Jewish population. And just being able to sit through that service and participate in it was so profound for me from a Christian background that, you know, heralds back to sort of that Abrahamic tradition and seeing how many similarities there were, but also how many differences I could learn from. And I think that helped strengthen my faith a lot. And help connect me with my Savior a lot more. But then also one of the things I loved doing was just getting my hands dirty. We went up to McCall, Idaho, and we helped weed some people's garden plots that they'd been given by this local food pantry. And I spent so long and I got so sunburned, but it just felt really good.
Says the redhead.
Yeah, it was bad. I forgot sunscreen. But I was literally digging in the dirt to help these people in this effort to support themselves with this local garden. And so that was also really impactful for me.
Thank you very much. And I wonder if I could ask you, Grace, you're a history major.
Yes.
And the history of humanity has lots of good, lots of bad. How does this fit and what you've been studying fit into your history major?
So research, a lot of what I do is women's history, but particularly women's religious history and how they've been involved politically. So I've done a few different projects. I did one with the Special Collections as a research fellow looking at LDS women and their opposition of the Equal Rights Amendment and how they could still fit in with the feminist movement. And then while I was in Cambridge, I was able to go for a few days into London and do some research at the London School of Economics on women's suffrage and how the women's suffrage movement actually had a lot of interfaith involvement, which I thought was interesting. I found a lot of documents about how there were these days of a call to prayer and women at the synagogues and women at the Catholic Church and Anglican churches were all praying on the same day. And so I think interfaith to me in history and how they connect is that it's a way we can see, even though there's been lots of divisions over religion, if we really look, we can see that there's also ways that people can connect as well, which can also apply to our day to day. So I think I found that really interesting, looking for the hope and how we can be united in our spirituality and how there's movements like political movements that can bring us together, but also like what we're doing in Interfaith Club of finding ways to help in our community and finding historical ways that can apply to now of how interfaith work is so powerful in doing good and helping people and forwarding human rights as well.
Thank you. I'm wondering, Mike, in projects like this, outside of the classroom, how do you measure if it was a success?
Oh, that's a good question. So in part, especially with the interfaith class, one of the things that we decided was that we were going to get out in the community. And we're going to make a difference in the community with other people who are of other faiths. And so as part of that, we started learning a lot from like Catholic community services. So we started serving in local food kitchens, and that was a major part of the class. Like that was one of the activities that they would, we would determine whether they were doing good or not, or whether we were trying to, or whether we were accomplishing our goals. And so as we went out into that community, we did realize that we didn't have all the tools we needed. Like we wanted to do a lot more, and we were trying to do more. Like we even did, did a donation drive, and we served, and we had over 700 hours of community service just from that church. And that came from the leadership of the students. The students weren't doing those hours. They were enabling others to do those hours. And so that was a major part. We were trying to create leaders and form a kind of ethic, an interfaith ethic that gave them the tools to be those leaders. And so one was we were trying to figure out what it was like to do this in our own community. And then the Boise trip was a way for us to learn from people who knew how to do it better than us. Mm-hmm. And we went there, and we've learned so much that we're now applying that now. The Interfaith Student Club is still doing that service. We plan on we're hoping like 2,000 hours. We're hoping for a lot more this semester. And so it's our leaders who've developed a kind of ethic that will change the world in their own lives. And so I guess the success is coming from, this wasn't just a class, this was a culture that is being developed at BYU by the students, through the students. And I think this semester is the sign of success. It hasn't collapsed. It's expanded.
I hope it's not collapsing.
Yeah, but that's the thing you hear sometimes about, and this is said sometimes disparagingly, but sort of voyeuristic help me come up with the right term. It's sort of like you're on safari and you get this service opportunity, and then you go back to your 5-star hotel, and it's sort of like drop-in service. Yeah. But it sounds like you're trying, when you talk about developing an ethic, I'm interested in hearing more about that, like from any of you as students. How does this continue on, what you've learned?
I can start, I guess. I think the biggest thing for me has been that we went to Boise, we learned from people, like Mike said, that know way more than we do, and then we've come back and we've tried to apply that. So in our presidency meetings and things like that for the Interfaith Student Association, we're talking about, okay, how can we work with the groups in our area like this group did in Boise? Or how can we apply sort of this thing that we learned in Boise to the service that we want to do? Or how can we find a way to do it with our club what we saw someone do in Boise that we see isn't being done here? And so, thinking about that homelessness aspect, like there's a really large portion of the BYU student body that is homeless. They sleep in their cars and come to school every day. And so how can we serve them, right? How can we start in our community and work with people of all faiths, both on campus and off, to serve those people in, even just Provo who are experiencing homelessness? And so those are the kind of initiatives that we're continuing on from Boise while adding on to those things that we've already established, like Catholic community services and other service opportunities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think what's key to interfaith work, and we discuss it a lot, is yes, it's the projects, and the projects are important, but the projects aren't successful unless a connection is made, right? Mm-hmm. That there has to be that opportunity to connect with people. And I think Janai and I found that when we were in Cambridge, when we were touring mosques or our different Anglican religious services, that opportunity to connect with people and to know the other, someone you didn't know before, that's what keeps interfaith work going. And I think that's what helps us when we do it. And that's what's so powerful, is the way that we've been influenced and how our lives have been made better and our faith has been strengthened through interfaith work. So if we don't make those connections with one another, those human connections, then that's not really interfaith work. That's what's key.
Amen.
You said something important about your faith was strengthened. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
Interfaith work has been so powerful for me within my own faith. And I think distinctively when we were in Cambridge doing our program, I think of one Sunday when we were in London. And that morning we had gone to a prayer service at St. Paul's Cathedral. And then we were going to our LDS service, a sacrament service after. And I'd gone with some other girls back to my apartment to switch some things. And it was a 40-minute train ride, switching trains to get there. It was very hectic. And I was running to catch buses so I could make it to my service. And after going to all these other different churches where I still felt so filled, and then I walked into my own church, I remembered, this is my home. This is my faith that I grew up in, and I can find this truth everywhere, but this is where my identity lies as well. And I think it's just so powerful to see the other ways that people connect with God and how their lives have been improved because of it and how they overcome their challenges through faith. And that's inspired me. And I think it's so powerful that I can go to my own sacrament service and feel that connection, but that I can be in St. Paul's Cathedral and be so overcome with emotion by the choirs or the service. And I just think that that's what's powerful about interfaith work, is that we can see God everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that's being able to find the Spirit in all things is, I think, that's what God asks us to do. And that's what I've found through my interfaith work.
I love that. And before I head over to you, Katelyn, did any of you have any trepidation or fear or discomfort at, I'm going into all these different places of worship I haven't been before?
I definitely did when I first started doing interfaith work. I had a class on the history of Christianity, and one of our assignments was to go to either an Orthodox service or a Catholic service. And so I drove up to Salt Lake by myself, and I went, and I was really nervous. But I think the more times I went and the more services I went to, I became more comfortable. And I saw that I think people think that religions aren't always super open to lots of visitors. And not a lot of people would be open or feel brave enough just to walk into a service they've never been to before. But when you try and you be brave and you go to a lot of them, you get more comfortable. And I think even sometimes my family is a little surprised at how many different faiths and services I go to. And it's not an indication of any bad feelings towards my own, but that I'm trying to connect with God even more.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think there is some sort of you always feel a little nervous going to a new place, right? And so maybe just showing up at your local Catholic church, you might feel that sort of nervousness, I'm the new kid, I don't know anyone, and I don't really know how this goes. And so I think for me, talking to my professors about kind of what the expectation was, or what I could or couldn't do at certain things and at certain points was helpful beforehand. So a good old Google search will do the trick. But I also think that most of the time religious people are very, very welcoming. That's the only thing I've ever experienced, is walking in somewhere and having someone be like, oh my gosh, welcome, right? What's your name? Where are you from? Why are you here? Please come sit with me, right? And I think that is... that's the general.
You sort of feel that tension melt away a little. If you feel okay, someone can guide me through this.
Yeah, and it's normally the really sweet old ladies that'll come up to you, and so it just feels like you get an extra grandma, which is awesome. But there's a kind of, to talk about what you were saying earlier as well, there's this line from a song that I really love that said, for the Father, there's nothing better than when the kids all come together, right? And this idea that, I believe that God is the Father of all of his children, right? And so that includes everyone on the face of the planet. And so when you get together with people of your own faith or other faiths, right, I can just feel God kind of smiling on us together, right? He loves that. And so that kind of combination of just love and goodwill is my favorite thing. And so I love going to other services.
Janai.
Yes, I'm in total agreement with Katelyn that, compassion and love and hospitality, these things tend to be the meeting point of most religious communities that I can think of. And of course, it's always going to be an uncomfortable thing to walk into a new situation. And as you continue on in interfaith endeavors, the fact is that you will be going into new situations. You'll be going into, maybe a religion, a service of religion that you have visited before, but it's a different community and they might do things slightly different. You'll be meeting new people. You'll be constantly having conversations with people who have their own particular beliefs or way that they approach their religion. And so I think if that discomfort continues, it's nothing to be panicked over. That's just going to be sort of the reality of moving along in life, generally speaking. And when we talk about interfaith relationships and this ethic we're trying to live out, a huge part of that is learning to develop a proper disposition towards other people who are different, who have different beliefs, who belong to a different religious tradition. And that might be uncomfortable at times, but it's really just about viewing them in a respectful way and being open to the value that they have to bring to the table. And when you have that sort of disposition, almost all the time, your conversation is going to be one of goodwill and love and these kinds of things. So I think that's like the important thing to remember, that it may be uncomfortable, but that's okay if that's something that persists in your work. Mm-hmm.
I think what's really powerful about the Interfaith Student Association is that we all have these feelings of discomfort at times, but with the Student Association, we can go together and we're all united, and it provides a space where, like me and Janai, just on Sunday, we're at an Episcopalian service together. And I'd never been before, but I was there with people I trusted and friends, and then we go and we make more friends. And I think that's what is so great about Interfaith Student Association. It provides a space at BYU where those who want to explore other faiths and find space where we can understand other faiths better, we have each other to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's what's been really powerful about being a part of the Interfaith Student Association.
I think the whole idea of avoiding discomfort isn't very scriptural. When we talk about to mourn with those who mourn, well, that means I'm going to be mourning. I have to hear some things that might be uncomfortable. If I'm going to bear somebody's burdens, I have to know what those burdens are. And I think there's a certain amount of discomfort built into discipleship.
It's interesting because just yesterday we have a new university president here at BYU, and President Reese and his wife Wendy spoke in a university forum or a devotional, and Wendy spoke about this idea of, for incoming freshmen especially, being uncomfortable and feeling discomfort, and said, sometimes you just have to go along with that a little ways. And I think that's an invitation that is constant from interfaith work, is that we're invited into the space of discomfort, only to find that we become very comfortable, usually fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think our students are so good at that. For me, that's part of why I love working with the Student Interfaith Association, and teaching the classes that Mike and I get to, is our students are so good at this. They're always teaching me a bit more about how we actually do this well. So the ethic, I think, that Mike and I had envisioned probably looks different today than it did a year and a half ago when we were planning out what the class would be, because our students taught us so much, especially in Cambridge and Boise and elsewhere, is kind of seeing them do this. We just experienced a new kind of interfaith engagement.
So the project in Boise was both urban and rural settings for about 10 days. You have an Arthur Vining Davis grant for interfaith literacy. Congratulations, by the way.
Yeah,
even you probably should get an award just for the grant writing process.
We're pretty excited.
That all goes to Andy. That's all his thing.
And then we've talked about the Wolf Institute, WOOLF, just a little bit, that's associated with Cambridge. And this is 10 students who go there attending classes. And tell me about their focus.
So the Wolf Institute is a unique place. It's one of the leading interfaith research and education centers in Britain. I actually was a student there doing a master's degree in Jewish-Christian relations. And over time, we've just sort of maintained that relationship. and I have now the chance to take students back there. So we've taken as many as 27 students there for a summer school. They're there in Cambridge. The Wolf Institute is a place where they get to engage with ideas and learn about the history, learn about theological concepts, look at legal situations, whether it be in the Middle East or in Britain, and they're being trained by Cambridge professors and others who are researching in that area. And so every day it's a new professor, it's a new topic, and the students sort of just get thrown into it with a little bit of a reading assignment maybe, but they're kind of thrown into it to sort of just soak up as much information as they can.
And this may sound pretty elementary, but they want to do interfaith study and teaching to what end?
So the Wolf Institute has a very kind of specific goal, which is to help provide research and training to practitioners of religion, whether that be religious leaders or lay members of traditions, but also to be able to be of service to governments, NGOs, by providing data about what religious communities are worried about, what are the conflict zones, how do you help people learn to engage somebody they just vehemently disagree with. This idea of being in dialogue and conversation isn't just about, we're from two different religions and so we get along because we can talk to each other, but it's about what happens when we're fighting over land or we're fighting over our history. And the Wolf Institute's sort of leading out in that space, trying to, sort of create opportunities for students and others to learn how to do this well, to really solve some social problems in the world. Janai had a unique opportunity this summer, being an intern there for, about 8 weeks or so?
3 months.
3 months. So working directly in the Institute and helping them with their programming, and had some unique opportunities along the way that, I think if we could afford that for every one of our students, it'd be amazing. But, occasionally we get a student that gets to do that. So,
any commentary on that, your experience there as an intern? So there you're not just taking classes, but you're actually helping run the thing.
Yes, there is so much that I could say about the Wolf Institute and my participation there. But yeah, as the intern, I was invited to participate in a number of their ongoing research projects, which are aimed at improving the relations between religion and society. And you'd be surprised at the kinds of questions this leads them to ask and the kinds of things that they end up being involved with. Refugees, for example, or end-of-life care is another one. And so I ended up working in a number of these projects and participating in some really incredible experiences as a result of my internship.
So, again, the silly elementary question, who's against this? Who's not for this? And yet, if you bring up interfaith work, I don't know that it's high on everybody's list of stuff I got to get done in my religious life. Any comments on?
Well, Mike and I talk about this all the time, but there are people who are against it, and maybe not. I think a lot of people like the idea of interfaith. That it seems like a positive. Yeah, we should be talking to people of other faiths, but there's also people who, if we hold a very strong claim to truth and that's exclusive, my truth is the only truth, and therefore no one else has truth. Interfaith looks very strange to them. Like, why would we do that? Or worries that if I engage in interfaith work by going to another religious service, if I'm reading someone else's sacred text, that's inevitably going to water down my own faith.
If they have better music.
If they have now,
what are my personal temptations?
A hot take here, but I think a lot of traditions have better music than my own tradition.
100%.
And so what happens if I enjoy their music more than mine? Is that going to pull me away from my tradition? And I think we worry about that as parents, as students. We worry about, am I losing something in the process? I think and I think all three of the students here, but many other students would tell you that in the process of learning about interfaith and world religions, I think Mike's student evaluations show this every semester, that students love this. And it strengthens their own faith. I think they develop a different relationship with God along the way that is deepened and isn't pulling away from their own tradition, but is actually deepening their appreciation for what God's doing in the world.
That's the way it strikes me. When I see and speak with friends of different faiths, and we get on a level where they can talk about their hopes or their fears or how they've seen God working in their life, I always end up with more faith that he's also working in mine, even at times when I sort of wish I could detect that, but I have faith it's happening. And then as time goes by, I look back and I see that he has been, but it strengthens my faith to hear that. What about these evaluations? What do you love about what students are getting?
I think like one of the things I'm impressed with is like it's a very valuable tool for us to make sense of ourselves, to create boundaries, and within those boundaries we create goals that we can achieve and we become something. And so we live in these worlds where we're expressing ourselves and building ourselves into something, and we create a lot of exclusionary boundaries that are really helpful to us. And religion does this a lot. Part of the processes of developing religion is to create exclusionary boundaries. And those exclusionary boundaries, like going to the temple for a Latter-day Saint, are things that create some of the most holy spaces and some of the most beautiful events that we attend to in our lives. And so when we start breaching those boundaries by seeing other people's holy spaces, it can be kind of threatening. And so I think students, with that ethic that we're teaching them, it allows them to value those boundaries, to allow them to see, well, what in my life allows me to create an exclusionary boundary that will be something of good instead of something that hurts someone, something that causes pain in someone's life. And so when you begin to vet your own boundaries and realize, like Latter-day Saints practice, they develop a way to go to the temple and to find this holy space, and it really changes their lives and turns them into something they couldn't otherwise be. And then they look at these other religions who are doing the same thing, and it allows them to see the value of difference, not finding difference to be something scary, but finding difference to be the core ethic in your life. Like, if I can value those that are radically different than I am in a way that I love my own family, then I think we've learned to really embrace how we love our neighbor, how because we love God, we now love our neighbor by understanding those. So in some of those student comments, you get this coming through, like the things that like me and Andy talk about, because sometimes we're not as good at it, or we want to be better at it. And we sit there and it turns into like our students are negotiating these boundaries with us. And for me, I find out teaching ends up being something so important for me, like where I'm really growing, because these smart students are working through how to be a good person in the world as a Latter-day Saint. And so you see that come through in their student evaluations, where there's these heartfelt things where they're like, I think my life has changed. And to me that's a big deal. Like, it's plus I don't want to hear something like, oh, that assignment was too tough. But they end up instead of education being something that they can package, possess, and sell to an employer, their education has become something that they can embrace, and it changes their lives and turns them into somebody who can change the world and care about other people. So that really is the notion that we get in our student evaluations. So for me, it's changed my life. It's wonderful for me, as well as students who are also trying to do the same thing.
I wonder if any of you resonate with this image, which is, for me, I felt like learning about other religions helped me understand my own and my own faith, almost like learning a second language often teaches you to understand your own first language, which you didn't really have to study, you just acquired as children do. Do you find that religious literacy, at least for me, has strengthened my knowledge, even an understanding of my own faith?
For sure. I think some of my strongest sort of teaching moments with God, where God has like taught me things, have happened in interfaith spaces. And it helps me to sort of understand the way he works with me and my relationship with him in a much more profound and deep level. But I think also like learning about especially faiths that are really closely related with my own, so Judaism and other sorts of like Catholicism and other sorts of Christian faiths, I've been able to understand the history of my faith and sort of where different doctrines come from a lot more, because, you know, the LDS faith is very new in terms of religions, right? Catholicism's been around for 2,000 years, Judaism for as long as the Bible. And you start to see these patterns in other faiths that then you can apply to your own and be like, oh, okay, this is where that comes from, and I can see why this is important now. It's not just something that I do because someone told me to, right?
Thank you.
To add to this, Latter-day Saint Christians have this tendency to adopt their own lingo, right? I am also a Latter-day Saint Christian. Right. We, since the beginning, since the Restoration, or Joseph Smith's vision, Latter-day Saints have sought to differentiate themselves from other Christians, right? And that's a part of the unique message of the Restoration. And as a result, we often put ourselves sort of in this theological vacuum, as though we don't have prior influence to what our current doctrines are. And so that sort of makes it at times difficult to have conversations or relate, because we're trying to speak across languages, right? For example, the atonement, like no other, even though it was a word that was created by a Protestant Christian, not really many Christians use this in the modern day. Most will refer to the sacrifice of Jesus as the passion and death of Christ, or something like that. And that's just one of like plethora of examples in the way that we use our language differently. And so I think interfaith requires that we sort of situate ourselves theologically and to understand, okay, how do we stand in position to other faith traditions? What does this mean about our stance in this particular doctrine? And so I think that is one way in which it helps us to really understand what we're actually saying.
I think it also, when we look back at the LDS faith tradition and even the origins, we look back to the first vision. And what I get from the first vision and my belief in is that God speaks to his people. But when I've done interfaith work and I understand other faiths better and I read their sacred texts and I attend their services, you understand that God speaks to all his people, and that I can see that he is speaking to those in the Anglican service, but that he can also speak to me. So I think that's so powerful, in understanding our own faith is expanding how involved God is in the whole world around us, which is just, I think it really strengthens my faith and helps me to just keep pushing forward with my faith too.
Yeah, I was going to use the word hope. It makes me very hopeful. I'm wondering, Andy, what should I have asked about these projects and these classes that I didn't know to ask? Is there anything you'll think, darn, I wish we'd gotten to such and such?
I think that these projects and these different experiences for students really is they're built around the very idea that BYU has become very important for us, that our learning, our education should be inspiring. In every aspect of what we're doing, whether it be in the academic setting or if it's standing there listening to a young woman talk to us who's had some very difficult life experiences while we're in Boise. She's telling us a little bit about her story. I don't know that there was a person in the room who wasn't inspired by something that happened there. Or even part of the reason I enjoy taking students to Cambridge is letting them be in Cambridge and being forced to look up. It's inspiring to see the spires and the colleges and all of that. There's elements of inspiration that come along, and for each of these projects, if we were to downplay the impact in terms of the ways that we've individually been inspired by these, I think we miss something because they are academic programs. Our students had to read and research and, do all these things that we think of with education. But the application isn't just, I'm now solving a problem, but I'm being inspired to search for the answers that might help solve a problem. And I think that's my biggest takeaway is really being inspired by what's happening.
And nice that there is such a focus on learning to make that happen here at the university.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm so impressed with the programs. I'm delighted to meet all of you and to hear, especially from the students who are the ones sort of, sounds like in one case, literally in the trenches.
Yeah, it was fun.
Take sunblock next time.
I'll do my best.
I've been speaking with Professors Andy Reid and Mike McKay, and also with Katelyn Boyer, Grace Chipman, and Janai Wright. Thank you all for speaking with me today in good faith.
Thank you for
Thanks,
having
Steve.
us.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.